Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Derek Thomas, Senior Fiscal Policy Analyst at FPWA, and with me today is Gaurav Gupta-Kasale. He's the Fiscal Policy Associate here at FPWA. We recommend viewing this in full screen. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. We'll kick off our time together to share why we built the Federal Funds Tracker and how the tracker and FPWA's fiscal policy team can support your federal budget advocacy efforts. We'll then provide a tour of the website, show you how to use the open data features, and wrap up with a Q&A. We want to make sure the tracker meets your needs, so in addition to sharing the webinar and other materials in the next few days, we'll also send out a survey for additional feedback. Following the 2016 election, FPWA member agencies expressed grave concern about the impact of federal fiscal policies on New York City's social services budget and sector. As stewards of the economies they serve, they also voiced interest in acquiring actionable information and assistance in navigating the many threats their communities faced under the current administration. Our members, many of whom have been fighting poverty on the front lines for more than a century, rely on federal funding, oftentimes passed through from the city, to provide care for older adults, the youth, people living with mental illness, and persons with mental disabilities, physical disabilities. They're also stamping out hunger, offering safety and services for survivors of domestic violence, building skills and breaking down barriers for individuals locked out of the workforce, and working to integrate the justice involved into their communities. To do so, FPWA's membership relied on nearly $300 million in federal grants in fiscal year 2017. This is likely a conservative estimate, as publicly available audit data only reports on federal grants that nonprofits rely on if they receive more than $750,000 in federal grants. We built the tracker to protect and strengthen this funding, but it's equally useful to anyone who cares about federal funding that supports the city's social services budget and sector, or for access and exploration for data on all federal grants to New York City. We'll explain each of these, that is the analysis, advocacy, open data components, in more depth in a few moments, but first let's take a tour of the website. The tracker demystifies the federal budget by organizing the data into accessible and interactive visualizations, bringing the data to life with stories of New Yorkers whose quality of life was improved by federal support, and removing barriers to federal budget advocacy. Here's the landing page. We'll come back to this in a moment, but for now I want to draw your attention to the landing page on the Federal Funds Tracker in the blue boxes. This is where we organize, analyze, and visualize federal budget data for all federal grants to the city and by agency. Currently, the tracker features Administration for Children's Services, Department of Social Services, Department of Youth and Community Development, and Department for the Aging. The All Federal page is a great place to start for context. Here we begin by summarizing key policies dating back to 2010, such as the 2011 Budget Control Act that capped spending and called for across-the-board budget cuts known as sequestration. While a series of short-term budget deals over the last decade reduced the amount by which the caps were lowered, non-defense discretionary programs overall have seen significant reductions since 2010. Let's take a look at one of our visualizations to illustrate how what's done in DC matters to New York City. As you can see, the impact of federal austerity ripples across the entire city, from housing, education, environmental protection, transportation, and more. We find that from fiscal years 2010 to 2018, all federal grants to the city have fallen by nearly $2 billion, or 21%, after adjusting for inflation. Federal grants for social services have fallen by more than $300 million. A couple of things about the trend charts to know while we're here. We baselined these charts in 2010 because that's the year before the Budget Control Act passed and disinvestment began. These charts rely on data from the Comptroller's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which reports on actual spending from the previous year. We collected this data back to 2010, organized them by category, and adjusted them for inflation. We all know that the price of a loaf of bread isn't what it used to be, and the cost of services and goods tends to rise each year. So taking inflation into account is the only way to meaningfully compare dollar amounts over time. In other words, even if a grant hasn't been cut, if it's been flat funded since 2010, that is equivalent to a cut. Inflation, of course, doesn't even take into account population changes. For example, as the population of older adults rises, so should, in theory, spending on elderly care. Let's dive deeper into the federal grants that support the city's social services budget and sector. Federal funding for the agencies featured in the tracker currently represented 38% or $2.9 billion of the approximately $7 billion in federal funding the city received in fiscal year 2018. By the way, this year we'll be adding Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Housing Preservation and Development, Small Business Services, and Department of Homeless Services. After these agencies are added this year, the tracker will include information for nearly all social service grants and 70% of all New York City's federal grants. Let's explore DFDA's portal using an FPWA member as an example. Brooklyn's Heights and Hills, which serves more than 4,000 older Brooklynites annually and their families to age successfully in their communities, relies primarily on federal grants that flow from the Department for the Aging. They and advocates for older adults in general can use DFDA's portal as a one-stop shop for the data and storytelling components to 1, visualize trends in federal grants, 2, read stories about the individuals whose lives have been positively impacted by federal support, and 3, take a deeper dive into current funding. By the way, to make the portal more user-friendly, you can click on these images to navigate the page. For example, click here to visualize funding trends, and use this arrow in the bottom right to navigate back to the top. Going back to the visualization of trends, you can use the drop-down menu to explore funding trends in DFDA's primary grants and read about how those federal grants support specific services within DFDA. For example, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, which has fallen by $3 million since fiscal year 2010, supports the development of skills training for older adults. And here we see caregiver support grants, which Heights and Hills relies upon, fell by $1 million since fiscal year 2010. Well, it's a smaller grant than many of the individual grants featured in the tracker. There's about 40 of them, and it's just a fraction of the hundreds of millions of dollars in social service grant declines the city has experienced. The storytelling and current funding features will contextualize and illustrate that the impact of this grant is nevertheless profound. To bring the data to life, the portal also features stories, as told by our members, of individuals whose lives were positively impacted by federal support. Again, regarding the navigation of the page, you can scroll down to see them, or you can use the images at the top of the website to navigate each feature. For example, and continuing our focus on Heights and Hills and the caregiver support grants, Karen, who was overwhelmed and isolated by her mother's advancing Alzheimer's disease, stood on the edge of the subway platform with tears streaming down her face and contemplated jumping onto the tracks. She knew she had a call with her support group that evening, so she shared her feelings with them and found the strength to keep providing the care her mother needed. In fiscal year 18, Heights and Hills caregiver program, supported by, as you may have guessed, the federal caregiver support grants, provided support for 1,300 family caregivers in Brooklyn alone. Finally, the page features current year federal funding. We begin by showing the share of city, state, and federal revenue that supports each agency. And to the right of that, we show which grants make up the bulk of the agency's federal revenue. As you can see, caregiver support is not included in the chart featuring grants that provide the bulk of DFDA's federal funding. However, by taking a deep dive into the program areas within an agency, such as the 6 within DFTA, the tracker reveals that it does provide the bulk of federal funding for DFTA's Senior Services Program. By the way, you might ask, what exactly are caregiver support grants, and what is DFTA's Senior Services Program? We have a glossary that's easily navigable for that. A couple of things about the current funding charts to know while we're here. For these, we rely on New York City Office of Management Budget's Budget Function Analysis report. The disadvantage of the BFA is that these are estimates. The advantage is that the BFA provides federal data for an agency's program areas, a level of detail not included in the Comptroller's report. We'll preview our Tableau page shortly, but just note that to see all the grants that support an agency or program area, you can simply click on the Tableau link below. Here you can see all federal grants that fund an agency, unlike the chart on our page that only features the grants that provide the bulk of federal funding. There's another visualization that might be of interest, which shows that certain programs areas within an agency are more vulnerable to federal budgets than others. For example, the Senior Centers and Meals relies on the most support in terms of dollars, while Senior Employment and Benefits relies on the largest share of federal support. Finally, we'll update these and the trend data charts at the end of each year. Let's stay on DFTA's page for a moment to go over one other technical note about our methodology. You may notice we show here in current funding that the Social Services Block Grant and the Community Development Block Grant support DFTA's Senior Services Program area, but they do not appear in the trend charts above. Because grants such as SSBG and CDBG allow for flexibility in how the city can distribute them, multiple agencies in the city rely on them, and they can be shifted around based on the city's priorities. So including them in an agency's trend analysis would not accurately reflect how these grants in totality have changed over time. To resolve this, we only included in the trend charts what we've defined as primary grants, that is, grants that have exclusively and consistently supported an agency since 2010. For the grants that fund across agencies, we call them citywide grants, and these have consistently, but not exclusively, supported one or more of the agencies going back to 2010. As you can see here, primary grants supported 69% of DFTA's federal revenue in fiscal year 2018, while citywide grants accounted for 30%. In each portal, you can click on citywide grants for our estimates of an agency's share of total declines in that citywide grant, such as the two featured here for DFTA, and you can read which program areas within an agency the grant supports. For the Social Services Block Grant, we estimate that DFTA's share of the full $27 million decline in Social Services Block Grant going back to 2010 is approximately 10% of $3 million. By the way, to visualize the full Social Services Block Grant funding trends and see which other agencies it supports, visit the citywide chart in the All Federal portal. Altogether, DFTA's federal grants have declined by $9 million since fiscal year 2010. This includes the 8 primary grants shown in the chart below and the agency's 2 citywide grants. So we understand that this is slightly confusing. We're currently considering ways to make this distinction clearer in the next version of the tracker, and we, of course, welcome your feedback. So that's an agency's portal. You can view trends in the federal grants it relies on, take deeper dives into current year funding, and read about the real-life impact of federal support across communities in New York City. Let's go back to the home page to go over the analysis, advocacy, and open data features I mentioned earlier. For for FPWA's fiscal policy team, the tracker acts as an infrastructure to easily analyze and draw public attention to budget and policy proposals by distributing these publications to members, advocates, policymakers, and media. Let's take a quick look at our analysis of Trump's fiscal year 2020 budget as an example of the type of analysis we'll produce, and which illustrates why the tracker will be a valuable tool right now. Broadly, the budget would deepen poverty and widen economic and racial disparities by hindering effective poverty-fighting tools, endorse devastating programs that that support our communities, children, and older adults, and maintain repressive caps on childcare and housing. It increases tax cuts to high-income taxpayers and heirs to very large states, and employs budget gimmicks to massively increase the defense budget. We find that the proposal would cut nearly $500 million of federal funding, or 16% of their total federal revenue from the tracker's 4 social service agencies. Due to the austerity we mentioned earlier, that is namely the 2011 Budget Control Act and sequestration, many of these grants have already endured cuts since 2010. As we mentioned, as a whole, social service grants in New York City have fallen by approximately $320 million since 2010. In the same brief, we illustrated how a few of FPWA's human service providing members would be impacted, such as the Chinese American Planning Council. As an aside, this analysis assumes that the city would distribute federal budget cuts evenly among nonprofit service providers. That's not necessarily the case. Rather, the city would make decisions about how to apportion the remainder based on its priorities. So it bears repeating that it will be critical to engage in federal budget advocacy efforts in the coming months. First, the House, Senate, and President are not at all on the same page about overall funding levels, and that's likely not going to change anytime soon. Absent an agreement in Congress before October 1st, when the new fiscal year begins, deep cuts to New York City's social safety net included in Trump's budget could become reality. We'll be in touch soon about advocacy opportunities, such as a sign-on letter, a press conference during the August recess, and either in-district or Hill visits in September. There's more to come on that soon, but you don't have to wait. You can take action now. On our Take Action page, we host campaigns from allied organizations such as Guidance from the Coalition on Human Needs to comment on the Trump administration's proposal to shrink the poverty line, and a sign-on letter to repeal the Trump tax cuts. We will update these frequently, including the sign-on letter for the comment period for the proposal to shrink the poverty line, as that comment period expired last Friday. So be sure to sign up for our email alerts as we add new action alerts to the website. The main feature of our Take Action page is the ability of users to contact their New York City area members of Congress directly from the website. Currently, we're asking folks to email their members of Congress or to urge them to reach a new budget agreement that not only reverses course on the planned sequestration cuts, but also increases support for the woefully underfunded programs that serve low to middle income families in New York City. For actions in which users can contact their members, we'll provide a template letter, as you can see here. But you can customize it, such as adding data on the number of individuals served by a program that's supported by federal funding, and/or telling real-life impact stories from your community. As always, please reach out to us if you have any questions, such as guidance in drafting this letter. Part of advocacy is also education. So under the Budget Basics tab, we provide a summary of the way in which federal grants flow to the city and a timeline of the federal budget process. Now that you've taken a tour of the website, our fiscal policy associate, Gaurav Gupta-Kasale, will lead the open data training. But I want to first make a quick point about the city budget data we've liberated from password-protected PDFs. We've done this over the last 2 years, scraping, organizing, and analyzing the data. We've made them available in downloadable spreadsheets and made it really easy for folks to do the analysis. We believe that democratizing the data and making it easy to analyze is a means by which to build power to protect the city's social services funding. Even still, we also understand that your capacity is limited, so we're fully available for technical assistance and/or to drop by for a personalized training that is tailored to your specific needs. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Gaurav, who's going to run through our open data features.
Thank you, Derek. For the open data training, I will demonstrate the tracker's open data features using Chinese American Planning Council as an example, to show you how easy we made it to analyze the impact of President Trump's fiscal year 2020 budget proposal. CPC relies on federal support to serve more than 60,000 individuals and families across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. We'll show you how to, 1, analyze the impact of the cuts on the grants that CPC relies on, 2, visualize the extent to which many of these grants have already endured cuts over the past decade due to the federal austerity Derek mentioned earlier, and finally, we'll show you how to embed our interactive data visualizations into digital media to provide even more context. Together, these data will help you build a compelling case that echoes FPWA's federal budget action item Derek mentioned previously. That is, an agreement that not only reverses course on the planned sequestration cuts, but also increases support for critical programs. We'll answer any questions, and afterwards, we'll post the webinar to our website and send out detailed step-by-step instructions. Let's take a look at the 2 charts we'll show you how to build. First, here's the impact of Trump's budget proposal on CPC's federal revenue. Under Trump's budget, CPC would face a 42% cut to their federal grants, driven in part by the proposal to eliminate 3 grants: Senior Community Service Employment Program, also known as CSEP, Community Services Block Grant, and the Social Services Block Grant. The second chart shows the extent to which these grants have declined over the past decade. It's important to note that in this slide, the inflation-adjusted changes illustrated here are to the total amount the city receives from Washington, not to the amount the city distributes to CPC. I will now show you how to access the data on the tracker. From the menu bar, click on Open Data. This page includes links to data sources and details of our methodology. To build the first chart, we will use the Federal Budget Analyzer dataset. This link will take you to the tracker's official GitHub page, where you'll be able to download the data. The Federal Budget Analyzer spreadsheet allows you to analyze the impact of federal budget proposals in just a few clicks. In the first tab, FPWA members can analyze the impact of Trump's budget on the grants they rely on. As Derek mentioned earlier, publicly available data is only available for members who rely on at least $750,000 of federal grants. For this reason, and because the tool is designed to be used by anyone who cares about federal funding in New York City, the second tab analyzes individual federal grants. For an FPWA member to analyze the impact of Trump's budget on their organization's federal funding, simply select your organization from the drop-down menu in the FPWA Members Grants tab. And that's it. You've just analyzed Trump's budget. Let me just explain to you what's featured in this sheet. The impact table, which is shown here, shows all the federal grants that the selected FPWA member organization relied on in 2018, the amount of the grant, and the impact of the President's budget on those federal grants. The summary table to the right summarizes the data to show the total impact by percent and dollar amount on an organization's federal grants. Finally, the chart brings it all together. That is, the impact on each individual grant and the total percent and dollar cut. You'll also notice the tree map as an added feature that allows you to visualize the federal funding members relied on in 2018. Let's take a quick look at a couple member organizations just to see how it works. As mentioned before, Trump's budget would cut CPC's federal grants by 42%, or $2.5 million. This is driven by a $1.8 million cut to CSEP, also known as the Senior Community Service Employment Program. Trump's budget would also cut university settlements grants by 8%, or more than $600,000. Likewise, Carter Burton's federal grants would be cut by 49%, or nearly $500,000, driven by the elimination of the social services block grant. One note, in the impact table, you'll see in column B the CFDA number. This is a useful identifier you can use to look up more information about specific federal grants at beta.sam.gov. The same design applies to the second tab, which again allows users to analyze individual grants. You can see that nutrition services for the aging would be cut by 2%, or nearly $500,000. TANF would be cut by 16%, or $282 million. And foster care would be increased by 3%. Or nearly $8 million. Let's take a sneak peek into an update we're currently adding to the spreadsheet. Soon you'll be able to compare Trump's budget to the House budget, which will be useful for illustrating Trump's cynical budget and to make the case for a budget that not only avoids cuts, but also invests in the programs you care about. For example, Trump would completely eliminate the Community Services Block Grant, while the House budget will increase the block grant by 5%. Child support enforcement would be cut by 1/3% under Trump's proposal, while the House would increase it by 1%. And finally, housing opportunities for persons with HIV or AIDS would be cut by 16%, or $8 million under Trump's proposal, while the House would increase it by 4%, or $2 million. By the way, if you're not already signed up, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter to receive the latest tracker updates, including these data updates. To build a second chart, we will navigate back to the tracker's open data page to download the inflation adjuster spreadsheet. The second chart will show how CPC's federal grants have suffered from a decade of historical disinvestment, and how Trump's cuts would therefore amount to cuts on top of cuts. To show the disinvestment that has occurred over the past decade, The inflation adjuster will calculate how much a federal grant should be if the grant had kept up with inflation. This chart is important to make a compelling case that any budget agreement should not only reject planned sequestration cuts, but also increase support for the woefully underfunded programs that serve low to middle income families, and that, when properly funded, strengthen the economy and improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers. To use the inflation adjuster, select your organization in the first tab or the individual grant in the second tab. Again, it's just that simple. You just analyze the impact of austerity on the grants you care about. Just like the impact analyzer, you'll find an impact table, inflation table, a summary table, and a chart. The data in column D are the nominal amounts the city received in 2010. Nominal is another way of saying the non-inflation adjusted amount. Column E adjusts that amount to show how much the grant would be worth had it tracked inflation. And finally, column F is the difference between the 2018 nominal amount, or the non-inflation adjusted amount, and the 2018 inflation adjusted amount. For example, the federal grants that CPC relies on have fallen by $164 million. That's on top of the $2.5 million cut in Trump's budget we analyzed a moment ago. The federal grants university settlement relies on have increased by $434 million. A note about organizations that rely on TANF, which is passed through from the state to the city, and then to nonprofits. New York State has increased funding to New York City over the past decade, but it also reduced support in other areas as a result of the governor's spending cap. Moreover, the federal allocation of the TANF block grant to the state has remained unchanged since TANF was created in 1996 under the guise of welfare reform, representing a decline in value of more than 35%. In other words, this analysis does not illustrate the federal decline in the value of the TANF block grant. A recent example of this is included in the latest state budget, which redirects federal family assistance funding from New York City and will cost the city $125 million annually. The federal grants and finally, we'll look at one more organization. The federal grants that the Carter Burden Center for the Aging relies on has fallen by $27 million. That's on top of the $500,000 cuts in Trump's budget. This is what we mean when we say cuts on top of cuts. Just as we've done in our analysis of the Trump budget on the 4 agencies featured in the tracker, you can now use these charts to raise public awareness about the impact of federal budgets on your specific organization and the grants you care about to advocate for a federal budget that meets the needs of the communities you serve. If you want to create a blog post of other digital media with these charts, there's one other feature we offer. After creating visualizations from your analysis, you can also embed interactive Tableau visualizations onto your digital media. Tableau Public is a free software that allows anyone to create interactive data visualizations simply by connecting to a spreadsheet. As mentioned before, you can access our Tableau Public page from the chart footnotes or the Open Data tab. Here is FPWA's Tableau Public page. There's a workbook for each agency that analyzes trends in current funding, as the website's portals do, and one that analyzes the impact of Trump's budget on each agency. By the way, we'll continue to populate this with other data, such as the poverty and income data here. All you need to do to share one or more of our workbooks in a digital platform is to click on the Share button so you can copy and paste the embed code into the digital media of your website. You know best how to advocate on behalf of your communities, but a powerful way to synthesize all of this, that is, both charts and the interactive data, is to build a blog post. Your organization's unique narrative will complement the fiscal analysis in a powerful way. For example, add in a story of how the federal grants your organization relies on directly impacts the programs and services provided for your clients, or use the data from the impact analyzer to build a tree map. Here's what that looks like for CPC. At the bottom, you will see the embedded Tableau workbook from before. One of the great features of Tableau is that its visualizations are interactive and user-friendly. And it's best seen in full screen mode. So these interactive data visualizations will provide more data for the user. And that's it. This is one of the many ways you can use the tracker's open data features to create a powerful story about the impact federal budget policy has on local communities. Once again, Derek and I are here for technical support. So if you have questions or would like help building a similar blog post for your organization, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Gaurav. We hope that made sense. We're here for questions, and our work is not finished. We'll continue to analyze federal budget proposals as they are released. We're going to add additional agencies this year, as I mentioned. We'll update the data. We're going to collect more stories from your communities, and we're going to improve the website's functionality, and we empower advocates with more open data training, and finally lead federal budget advocacy campaigns. If you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much.